My wife accidentally overheard my mom telling my sister, "Go ahead, order the lobster. He won't say anything, he never does." She wasn't supposed to hear that. When the bill arrived, my wife calmly picked it up, handed it to my mom, and said, "Your turn." I stayed silent. After that night, we didn't hear from them for 3 months. The words that shattered my family, that ripped open years of unspoken resentment, were whispered over a red lobster menu. "Get the lobster, Chloe. He won't say anything. He never does." Fluorescent lights hummed, casting an artificial, almost sickly glow on the crimson booths. The air, thick with the scent of melted butter and fried seafood, usually brought a strange comfort, a familiar family tradition. But that night, it felt heavy, suffocating, a prelude to a storm I couldn't yet see, but my wife, Sarah, already felt brewing. My name is Ethan. I'm 34 years old, and that dinner wasn't just a meal, it was the detonation point that blew my entire family apart. Not literally, of course, but in every other way that truly mattered. Before we get to the shrapnel, you need to understand the pressure that built up over decades. This wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing crack that finally broke wide open. I grew up in what looked like a picture-perfect suburban family. Me, my younger sister Chloe, and our parents, Richard and Karen. Nice house, 2 cars, neighborhood barbecues, the whole American dream package. But if you looked beneath the shiny surface, you'd find a stark reality that took me an embarrassingly long time to recognize. Everything, and I mean everything, revolved around Chloe. Now, I'm not saying my parents didn't love me. I know they did in their own way. But there's a universe of difference between loving your child and prioritizing them. Chloe got both. She got the bigger bedroom, even though I was older. She got a brand new car at 16. I got told I could save up for one if I picked up extra shifts at the hardware store. When Chloe wanted to do competitive dance, my parents chauffeured her 45 minutes each way, 3 times a week. When I wanted to play travel baseball, it was too expensive and too far. And the worst part? I believed them. I just accepted it. That's the insidious thing about being the kid who gets less. You don't realize it's happening because you've never known anything different. You just think that's how life works. Some kids get the shiny new toy, and some kids get the hand-me-downs. I was always the hand-me-down kid. I worked my way through a state university, a degree fueled by student loans, endless part-time jobs, and a ramen diet so extreme I'm pretty sure my blood type changed. Chloe? She went to a private university, full ride from mom and dad. I didn't even find that out until 2 years after I graduated, when my mom let it slip at Thanksgiving. She said it so casually, like she was telling me what kind of stuffing she used. Oh, we covered Chloe's tuition so she could focus on her studies. I just sat there, nodding like an idiot, a lump forming in my throat. What was I going to say? That was always my role. Ethan the agreeable. Ethan the easy one. Ethan who never makes a fuss. And for a long time, I wore that like a badge of honor, thinking being low maintenance made me a good son. Turns out it just made me an easy target. After college, I landed a decent job in logistics. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. I clawed my way up, promotion after promotion, eventually becoming a regional operations manager. I bought a small house, drove a reasonable car, lived comfortably within my means. Meanwhile, Chloe bounced between careers like it was a game show. Fashion merchandising, event planning, real estate for about 5 minutes, then some vague consulting thing that mostly involved posting inspirational quotes on social media. And through every pivot, every rough patch that miraculously lasted 3 years, my parents were there. Rent here, car payment there, a little something to tide her over. I never said a word. Not once. Then I met Sarah. Sarah is the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately diagnoses the temperature of every relationship within 10 minutes. She's sharp, she's witty, and she has this radar for nonsense that I've never seen in another human being. We met at a friend's wedding. She was the maid of honor. I was a groomsman. We spent the entire reception hiding behind a potted plant, stealing appetizers, and making fun of the DJ's playlist. I knew I was going to marry her by the 3rd stolen crab cake. We dated for 2 years and had a beautiful, Small wedding at a vineyard. My parents came, Chloe came, everyone smiled, and it was genuinely lovely. But even at my own wedding, there were moments. My mom spent half the reception talking about Chloe finding herself and how proud she was of Chloe's journey. Sarah caught it. She didn't say anything then, but she caught it. After we got married, things with my family continued as they always had. Dinner with my parents every few weeks. Sometimes Chloe would be there, sometimes not. And every single time, the same ritual played out. My parents would pick the restaurant, usually nice but not extravagant. We'd all order. Chloe would order whatever she wanted, top shelf, appetizers, dessert, the works. And when the check came, my dad would look at me, not at Chloe, not at himself, at me. And I'd pick it up. Every single time. We're not talking about splitting it evenly. We're talking about me covering the whole thing. My parents, Chloe, sometimes Chloe's flavor of the month boyfriend, and me and Sarah. I dropped sometimes $300 on these dinners without blinking because that's what Ethan did. Ethan picks up the check. Ethan doesn't complain. Ethan is the reliable one. Sarah started noticing the pattern early on. She'd bring it up gently at first. Hey, did you notice your dad didn't even reach for his wallet? Or, Chloe ordered a $40 steak and 2 cocktails and didn't even say thank you. I'd brush it off. They're my family, it's fine. Or, Chloe's going through a tough time. Or, my personal favorite, it's just dinner. But it wasn't just dinner. It was never just dinner. It was a system. A system where I paid, and everyone else benefited. And nobody, not once, ever considered that maybe it should work differently. And the worst part? I let it happen. I volunteered for it. I'd reach for that check like a reflex because somewhere deep down, I thought that if I stopped paying, they'd stop inviting me. And that thought scared me more than any credit card statement ever could. That all changed on a Thursday night in October. My parents invited us to that same Red Lobster near their house. Nothing unusual. Sarah and I drove over, walked in, sat down. Chloe was already there with her latest boyfriend, Mason, some guy in tech who talked about crypto like it was a religion. My parents were in good spirits. Everyone was chatting. It felt like a normal family dinner, utterly unremarkable. And then Sarah got up to use the restroom. She told me later what happened. She was walking toward the back, past the bar area, when she realized she'd left her phone at the table. She turned around, about to head back, when she heard my mom's voice. Clear as day. And what my mom said stopped Sarah dead in her tracks. Get the lobster, Chloe. He won't say anything. He never does. Sarah stood there for a second, frozen. She said it felt like the floor tilted beneath her. My mom wasn't whispering. She wasn't being sneaky. She said it the way you'd tell someone the weather. Casual, matter of fact, like it was the most obvious thing in the world that her son was a walking credit card who'd never push back. Sarah didn't say a word. She just walked back to the table, sat down next to me, and squeezed my hand under the table. I looked at her, and I could feel it. Something was profoundly different. Her jaw was set in that way it gets when she's made a decision, and there's no turning back. I didn't know what had happened yet, but I knew something was coming. And honestly, I had no idea just how much was about to change. For the rest of that dinner, Sarah was quiet. Not rude, not cold, just quiet. But I could feel the tension radiating off her like heat from a car hood in August. Something was wrong, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out what. Meanwhile, Chloe was living her best life. She ordered the lobster tail. Of course she did. She also ordered a shrimp appetizer and 2 glasses of wine. Mason got a steak and lobster combo that cost more than some people's car payments. My parents ordered modestly, the way they always did, because they knew they weren't paying. I ordered salmon. Sarah ordered a salad. That should have been my first clue. Sarah loves seafood. A salad at a seafood restaurant? That was Sarah's version of a protest sign. The conversation that night was the usual rotation. My dad, Richard, talked about his golf game. My mom, Karen, talked about her book club. Chloe talked about herself, which was Chloe's favorite subject. She was thinking about getting into interior design now, which apparently required a $3,000 online certification and a trip to some design expo in Miami. She mentioned it casually, the way someone mentions picking up milk. My mom nodded along like this was the most reasonable career pivot a 31-year-old could make. Ethan, you should help Chloe out with that certification, my mom said, turning to me like she was asking me to pass the bread basket. It would be a nice thing to do for your sister. I opened my mouth. I was about to say something. I don't even know what. Probably, sure. Or we can talk about it. Or some other spineless response that would have cost me $3,000 and another piece of my dignity. But before I could speak, Sarah put her hand on my knee under the table and squeezed hard. The kind of squeeze that says, "Don't you dare." "That's a big investment," Sarah said, looking at my mom, her voice even calm. "I'm sure Chloe has a plan for how she'll cover it." The table went quiet for about 2 seconds. It doesn't sound like a long time, but trust me, at a family dinner, 2 seconds of silence after a comment like that feels like an eternity. My mom blinked. Chloe looked at Sarah like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. My dad suddenly became intensely interested in his baked potato. "Well," my mom said, recovering quickly, "it's just something to think about." The rest of dinner was fine on the surface. People ate, people talked, people pretended that little moment hadn't happened. But I could feel the shift. Sarah wasn't playing the game anymore. She was done being polite. Then the check came. The waiter set it down in the center of the table, the way they always do. And the whole table did the thing they always do. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for it. Nobody even looked at it. They just kept talking, kept laughing, kept existing in this world where someone else always picks up the tab. And that someone is me. I started to reach for it. Force of habit. My hand was halfway there when Sarah reached past me, picked up the check holder, looked at the total, closed it, and slid it across the table to my mom. "Your turn," Sarah said. 2 words. That's all it took. The entire table froze like someone had hit pause on a movie. My mom looked at the check holder like it was a live grenade. Chloe's mouth fell open. Mason looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "I'm sorry," my mom said, and it wasn't a question. It was a challenge. "The check," Sarah said, calm as anything. "Ethan and I have covered every dinner for the last 3 years. I think it's fair that someone else takes a turn." My mom looked at me. She expected me to step in, to smooth it over, to do what Ethan always does and make it okay. But I didn't. I sat there. And I didn't say a word. Not because I was being strategic. Not because I had some grand plan. I just couldn't speak. It was like 34 years of swallowed words had finally lodged in my throat, and nothing could get past them. "Ethan," my mom said, her voice getting that edge to it, that tone she used when she wanted me to fall in line. "Tell your wife that's not how we do things." Sarah turned to me. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, and in that look was every conversation we'd ever had about this. Every time she'd pointed out the pattern, and I'd brushed it off. She was asking me, without words, whose side I was on. I looked at my mom. "She's right," I said. My voice was rough, like I hadn't used it in years. "We've paid for every dinner since Sarah and I started coming. It's someone else's turn." You would have thought I'd announced I was joining a cult. My mom's face cycled through surprise, anger, hurt, and then this cold, controlled fury I recognized from childhood. The face she made right before she'd go silent for days. "Well," she said, enunciating every syllable like daggers, "I didn't realize we were keeping score." "We're not," I said, my voice gaining strength. "That's the problem. Nobody's been keeping score, which is why I've been paying every time." Chloe jumped in then, a high-pitched whine in her voice. "Oh my God, Ethan. It's just dinner. Don't be so dramatic." And that's when something inside me broke. Maybe it was the word dramatic. Maybe it was Chloe sitting there with $100 meal in front of her, a meal I was expected to pay for calling me dramatic. Maybe it was everything. "Chloe," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You've ordered the most expensive thing on the menu at every family dinner for 3 years. And you've never once offered to pay. Not once. You've never even said thank you." Chloe looked at my mom for backup. My mom looked at my dad. My dad looked at his plate. Poor Mason looked like he was calculating whether he could fit through the bathroom window. "Ethan, you're embarrassing us," my mom hissed, her eyes blazing. "Just pay the check and we'll talk about this later." "No," I said. And I have to tell you, that was the hardest single word I've ever said in my life. Harder than any presentation I've given at work. Harder than any difficult conversation with a boss or a colleague. Because saying no to my mom meant saying no to the entire role I'd been playing since I was a kid. It meant admitting that the role was wrong, and that I'd been wrong to play it. Sarah stood up. She put her hand on my shoulder, a steady, grounding weight. "We're going to go," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The check is on the table. Good night, everyone." We walked out of that restaurant, and I swear the air outside tasted different. Like I'd been breathing through a filter my whole life, and someone had just ripped it off. We got in the car and sat there for a minute. Sarah didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't gloat. She just held my hand and let me sit with it. "What did you hear?" I asked her, my voice barely a whisper, because I knew something had happened when she went to the restroom.
She told me.
She told me exactly what my mom said to Chloe. "Get the lobster. He won't say anything. He never does." I sat with that for a long time, longer than I should have, probably. My own mother, the woman who raised me. She didn't just accept that I was being taken advantage of. She was coaching my sister on how to do it. She was the architect. She built the system, maintained it, and apparently gave instructions on how to exploit it most efficiently. Sarah drove us home that night because my hands were shaking. Not from anger, though there was plenty of that. From the gut-wrenching realization that the family I'd been killing myself to please had never once considered returning the favor. I was the ATM with legs, the one who'd always say yes, the good son. We didn't hear from my parents or Chloe for the rest of that week. No call, no text, nothing. Just silence. I kept checking my phone, expecting something. An apology, an explanation, even an angry voicemail. Nothing. A week turned into two turned into a month, and then 3. 3 months of absolute radio silence. I'd like to say I handled that gracefully. I didn't. That silence nearly broke me. Because as much as I knew they were wrong, there's a part of you that still wants your mom to call. There's a part of you that's still that kid who just wants to be enough. And when the phone doesn't ring, that kid takes it hard. Sarah held me together during those months. She didn't push me to reach out, and she didn't trash my family. She just kept showing up, kept being steady, kept reminding me that I wasn't crazy and I wasn't wrong. And slowly, painfully, I started to believe her. Those 3 months of silence were some of the loneliest months of my life. And I say that as a guy who once spent an entire summer in college with no friends and a broken air conditioner. At least that summer, I had a ceiling fan and bad television. This time, I had nothing but my own thoughts. And let me tell you, those were not great company. The first month was the worst. I kept replaying the dinner in my head. Not just the confrontation, but all the dinners before it. Years of them. I'd lie awake at 2 in the morning, doing math in my head, trying to add up how much I'd spent on family dinners over the last 3 years. Conservative estimate? Somewhere around $18,000. $18,000 on meals where I was apparently the designated wallet, while my mother coached my sister on how to order the most expensive item on the menu. That number kept me up more nights than I want to admit. I went through all the stages. Anger, obviously. I was furious. Then guilt, because somehow my brain decided that maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I should have just paid the check and dealt with it privately. Then anger again when I remembered that dealing with it privately was exactly what got me into this mess. Then sadness, deep, heavy sadness that sat on my chest like a bag of concrete. Sarah watched me go through all of it, and she never wavered. She'd come home from work and find me sitting on the couch, staring at nothing, and she'd just sit next to me. Sometimes she'd talk, sometimes she wouldn't. One night, she came home with a pizza and 2 beers and said, "We're watching the dumbest movie we can find, and we are not talking about your mother." We watched some terrible action movie where a guy punched a helicopter, and I laughed for the first time in weeks. I married the right person. I know that with absolute certainty. Around the 6-week mark, something shifted. I can't pinpoint the exact moment, but it was like a fog started to lift. I stopped checking my phone every hour, waiting for a call that wasn't coming. I stopped rehearsing conversations with my mom in the shower. I started focusing on what was in front of me instead of what was behind me. And what was in front of me was actually pretty good. Work was going well. My boss, David, had been hinting for months that a director position was opening up. The company was expanding operations into 2 new regions, and they needed someone to oversee the transition. It was a big job. More money, more responsibility, more visibility. The kind of opportunity that comes along once or twice in a career if you're lucky. I'd been hesitant to go for it before the dinner. Partly because I was busy, partly because I wasn't sure I was ready, and partly, if I'm being honest, because my family had never treated me like the kind of person who goes after big things. That sounds pathetic when I say it out loud, but it's true. When your whole life you've been the supporting character in someone else's story, it's hard to suddenly audition for the lead. But something about those 3 months of silence rewired my brain. If my family wasn't going to see me, fine. I'd make sure everyone else did. I told David I wanted the director position. He looked surprised for about half a second. Then he smiled and said, "I was wondering when you'd finally ask." Turns out, he'd been waiting for me to step up. He said he'd recommended me to the executive team months ago, but wanted me to be the one to pull the trigger. I threw myself into the interview process. 3 rounds of interviews, a presentation to the executive team, a full strategic plan for the regional expansion. Sarah helped me practice my presentations. She'd sit on the couch playing the role of skeptical board member, firing questions at me while eating popcorn. "What's your contingency plan if the supply chain breaks down?" she'd ask through a mouthful of kernels. I got the job. They called me on a Wednesday afternoon, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for 10 minutes just breathing. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because for the first time in my life, something big and good had happened, and my first instinct wasn't to call my parents. My first instinct was to call Sarah. And then my buddy, Sam, who'd been my best friend since high school and who'd been telling me for years that my family took advantage of me. I called them, and they were both thrilled, and that was enough. That was more than enough. The promotion came with a significant raise. I'm not going to throw out exact numbers, because it's not about the money, but let's just say Sarah and I went from comfortable to very comfortable. We started talking about buying a bigger house. We started a real savings plan. We took a vacation to the coast, just the 2 of us. And for the first time in years, I wasn't mentally calculating whether I could afford it after covering the next family dinner. During that same stretch, I reconnected with some people I'd let drift away. My cousin, Noah, on my dad's side, who'd always been the black sheep of the family for reasons I was now starting to understand. Noah had distanced himself from the family years ago after a similar dynamic played out with his own parents. He'd never told me the details, but when I called him and told him what happened, he just said, "Welcome to the club, man." The view from outside is a lot clearer. Noah and his wife, Olivia, became regular fixtures in our life. We'd do dinner at each other's houses, go hiking on weekends, normal stuff. And the thing that struck me was how different it felt. Nobody was keeping score. Nobody was angling for a free meal. We'd split the check or take turns, and nobody made it weird. That's how families are supposed to work. And it took me 34 years to figure that out. Sarah and I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Anya. Not because our marriage was in trouble, but because I had a lot of stuff to unpack, and I wanted to do it right. Dr. Anya helped me see patterns I'd been blind to my entire life. The way my parents had conditioned me to be the provider, the peacekeeper, the one who sacrifices so everyone else can be comfortable. She called it a functional role and said, "It's common in families where one child is the golden child and the other is the utility player. You weren't valued for who you are, Ethan. You were valued for what you provide. And when you stopped providing, they stopped engaging. That tells you everything you need to know about the dynamic." That hit hard. It hit hard because it was true, and because some part of me had always known it was true, but had never been brave enough to say it out loud. By month 3, I was a different person, not in some dramatic movie makeover way. I still looked the same, still drove the same car, still watched the same terrible action movies with Sarah on Friday nights. But inside, something fundamental had changed. I'd stopped waiting for permission to take up space. I'd stopped apologizing for existing. I'd stopped measuring my worth by how useful I was to people who never asked how I was doing. I was promoted. I was healthy. My marriage was stronger than ever, and I had people in my life who actually cared about me as a person, not as a resource. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. And then, right on cue, my mother called. It was a Sunday morning. Sarah and I were making breakfast pancakes, the good kind with blueberries, because we'd finally learned to make them without setting off the smoke alarm. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I saw Mom on the screen. My stomach dropped like I was on a roller coaster. 3 months of silence, and she picks a Sunday morning when I'm covered in pancake batter. I looked at Sarah. She looked at me. She didn't tell me what to do. She just raised her eyebrows in a way that said, "Your call." I answered. "Ethan," my mom said, her voice tight. "We need to talk." And the way she said it, I could already tell this wasn't an apology. This wasn't a reconciliation. This was a summons. My mother didn't call because she missed me. She called because she needed something. I just didn't know yet how big that something was going to be. "Your father and I want to have everyone over for dinner," my mom continued, and her voice had that careful, rehearsed quality to it, like she'd practiced this call in front of a mirror. "It's been too long. We miss you." She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't acknowledge what happened at the restaurant. She didn't mention what she'd said about the lobster. She just acted like 3 months of silence was a scheduling conflict, like we'd all been busy and, whoops, time just got away from us. "Okay," I said, my voice flat. "When?"
"Saturday."
"Your father wants to grill. Chloe will be there. It'll be nice." Nice. That word did a lot of heavy lifting in my family. Nice was what they called any arrangement that was convenient for them. "We'll be there," I said. Sarah looked at me when I hung up. "So, they want us for dinner on Saturday. Your dad's grilling." Did she apologize? Not even close. Sarah nodded slowly, not surprised. "So, what's this really about?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But it's something." I called Noah that night and told him about the invitation. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, just a knowing one. 3 months of radio silence, and then a call out of nowhere? Something happened, man. They either need money or they need a favor. And in your family, those are usually the same thing. I thought he was being cynical. He was being prophetic. Saturday came, and Sarah and I drove to my parents' house. It felt weird pulling into that driveway. Everything looked the same, but it all felt different because I was different. We walked in, and my mom hugged me like nothing had happened. Long hug, tight grip, the whole production. My dad shook my hand. Chloe was on the couch, scrolling her phone. She gave me a half wave and said, "Hey, Eth." Mason was gone, apparently, replaced by nobody, which was probably an upgrade. The first hour was aggressively normal. My dad grilled burgers. My mom made potato salad. Everyone was pleasant, overly pleasant, the kind of pleasant that makes your skin itch because, it's a performance. After dinner, my mom suggested we move inside for coffee and dessert. She'd made a lemon cake, which was my favorite. She hadn't made lemon cake in years. That detail landed like a flare. When your mom suddenly makes your favorite dessert after 3 months of pretending you don't exist, it's not affection. It's strategy. We settled in the living room. Coffee was poured, cake was distributed, and then my mom set down her fork and said, "So, Ethan, there's something we wanted to talk to you about." Here it comes, I thought. "Your grandmother's house," my mom said. "She's going into assisted living. Her memory's been getting worse, and it's time." My grandmother, my mom's mother, owned a house about 2 hours north of us. It was a beautiful property, 4 bedrooms, big backyard, wraparound porch, sitting on about 2 acres. My grandma had lived there for 40 years. I used to spend summers there as a kid, catching fireflies and eating watermelon on the porch. It was one of the few places from my childhood that held purely good memories. "The house is probably going to sell for somewhere around $400,000, my dad said, using his serious voice. "After fees and everything, the estate will see about $350, $360. I nodded, not sure where this was going, but feeling the current pulling me somewhere specific. The money from the sale is going to be split between the family, my mom continued. Your grandmother wants it to go to you kids, and to me and your Aunt Michelle. The plan is that I'll get a third, your aunt gets a third, and the last third goes to you and Chloe. So, roughly $120,000 split between me and Chloe. $60,000 each. That's a nice chunk of money, more than nice. But the way my mom was circling this topic, I knew the 60-60 split wasn't the plan she had in mind. Here's the thing, my mom said, and she leaned forward slightly, like she was about to share a confidence. Chloe is in a tough spot right now. The interior design thing didn't work out, and she's between things. She's got some credit card debt, and her lease is coming up, and she's going to need to get on her feet. Sarah's hand found mine on the couch cushion. We were thinking, my mom said, looking at me with that careful expression, that maybe you could let Chloe take a bigger share of the inheritance. You're doing well, Ethan. You've got a good job, a good salary. You don't need the money the way Chloe does. There it was. 3 months of silence, a grilled dinner, a lemon cake, and the whole production was a setup to ask me to give up my share of my grandmother's inheritance so that Chloe could bail herself out of whatever mess she'd made this time. I didn't say anything right away. I just let the silence sit. I could feel Sarah's grip tighten on my hand, but she stayed quiet. This was my moment. How much of a bigger share? I asked, keeping my voice neutral, surprisingly steady. My mom and dad exchanged a look. We were thinking Chloe could take the full amount, my dad said. The whole third. You'd step aside and let her have your portion, $120,000. They wanted me to hand over $120,000 to Chloe because she'd run up credit card debt chasing a career that lasted 5 minutes. They wanted me to give up my grandmother's legacy, money she specifically wanted me to have, because Chloe was irresponsible and I was successful. And in their twisted logic, that meant I owed her. Can I ask something? I said. My mom nodded, looking hopeful, like she thought I was about to agree. Why does Chloe have credit card debt? The hopefulness dimmed. What do you mean? I mean, you and Dad paid for her college. You've helped her with rent, with car payments, with every career pivot she's ever made. She's had more financial support than I ever got. So, where did the money go? The room got very quiet. Chloe, who'd been sitting in the corner chair pretending to study her phone, looked up. My dad shifted in his recliner. My mom's expression hardened. That's not fair, Ethan, my mom said. Your sister has had a harder path than you. How? I asked, and I wasn't being combative. I genuinely wanted to understand. How has her path been harder? You paid for her school. You've covered her expenses for years. I paid my own way through everything. I ate ramen for a semester because I couldn't afford groceries. Nobody offered to help me. You never asked, my mom said. And the way she said it, like that was a defense, like my silence was consent, made something click into place in my brain. You're right, I said. I never asked because I was taught that asking was weak. I was taught to handle things on my own while Chloe was taught that someone would always catch her. And now you want me to catch her again, with $120,000 that Grandma wanted me to have. My voice was rising, and I couldn't stop it. Why, Mom? Why was it always like this? I need you to tell me why Chloe gets everything and I get the bill. I need to hear you say it. She didn't answer. She just stared at me with this look that was somewhere between anger and something that might have been shame, though I couldn't be sure. My dad cleared his throat but didn't speak. Chloe was staring at the floor, her cheeks flushed. I'm not giving up my share, I said firmly. Grandma wanted me to have that money, and I'm going to respect her wishes. If Chloe needs financial help, she can get it the way I did. She can work for it. I stood up. Sarah stood up with me. Ethan, don't do this, my mom said, her voice cracking. Don't blow up this family over money. Sarah turned around at the doorway. She looked at my mom with this calm, level expression that somehow contained more authority than any raised voice ever could. Karen, you blew up this family over lobster. Ethan's just finally picking up the pieces. We left. We drove home in the kind of silence that isn't empty. It's full. Full of everything that just happened, everything that was said, everything that was finally out in the open. When we pulled into our driveway, Sarah turned off the car and said, "I'm proud of you." And I sat there in the passenger seat of my own car, in the driveway of the house I bought with money I earned, next to the woman who loved me enough to hand a check to my mother. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 34 years. I felt like I was enough. The fallout from that second dinner was immediate and loud. My mom called me 3 times the next day. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that ranged from guilt trip to threat to tearful plea, sometimes all 3 in the same message. "Ethan, your grandmother would be heartbroken if she saw you acting this way." That was my personal favorite because my grandmother was the one who specifically wanted me to have a share of the money. "But sure, Mom, tell me more about what Grandma would want." Chloe texted me a novel about how I was selfish, how I didn't understand what she was going through, how I'd always been the lucky one because everything came easy to me. Everything came easy to me. The guy who paid his own way through college and covered his family's dinner tab for 3 years. Yeah, I had it made. I didn't respond to any of it. I just didn't have anything left to say to people who couldn't see me as anything other than a resource. What I did instead was call my Aunt Michelle, my mom's sister. Michelle was the quiet one in the family, but she'd always been kind to me. I told her everything. The dinner, the lobster comment, the 3 months of silence, the setup. There was a long pause. Then Michelle said, "Ethan, I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. Your grandmother specifically asked me to make sure your share went to you. She told me, and I'm quoting her as close as I can remember, 'Ethan's the one who never asks for anything. Make sure he gets his.'" I had to put the phone down for a second after that. My grandmother, who was losing her memory, who was moving out of the house she'd lived in for 4 decades, had enough clarity to know that her daughter was going to try to redirect my share. She knew. She'd always known. Michelle told me she'd already talked to the estate lawyer and confirmed that the inheritance split was documented. It wasn't just a verbal agreement. My grandmother had it put in writing when she updated her will 2 years ago. 1/3 to my mom, 1/3 to Michelle, and 1/3 split equally between me and Chloe. $60,000 each. Legally binding. "Your mother can ask," Michelle said, "but she can't take, and I won't let her pressure you." God bless Aunt Michelle. She was the family member I didn't know I needed. Armed with that information, I called a lawyer. A guy named Ben confirmed that my grandmother's will was solid. My share was mine. No one could legally alter it without my consent. He also mentioned that if my parents tried to exert undue influence on my grandmother to change the will, especially given her cognitive decline, that could constitute elder financial abuse. I filed that away. A week later, my dad called. "Ethan, your mother is very upset. This whole situation has been hard on her." "It's been hard on me, too, Dad. 3 months with no contact, and then the only reason you reach out is to ask me to give up my inheritance. Your sister needs help. Then help her. You've been helping her for her entire life. Why does it have to come from me? Because you're in a better position." I'm in a better position because I worked for it. Nobody handed me anything. And the one time something is being handed to me, you want me to give it away? He paused. "Your mother is talking about not inviting you to Thanksgiving." I almost laughed. "Dad, you didn't call me for 3 months because Sarah handed Mom a restaurant check. A Thanksgiving threat isn't going to work on me." He didn't have an answer. Sarah's response when I told her, "We'll have our own Thanksgiving. I'll make the turkey. It'll be better." She was right. The house sold 6 weeks later for $415,000. After fees and closing costs, my share came to $62,000. The check came on a Friday. I stood in my kitchen holding it, and I got emotional. Not because of the money, but because my grandmother had made sure I was included. She'd seen me, even when my own parents couldn't. I put the money into a combination of savings and investments. Sarah and I used some of it as a down payment boost when we bought our new house a few months later, for bedrooms, a yard, a porch. It reminded me a little of my grandmother's place, which I think she would have loved. Chloe got her $62,000, too. According to Michelle, it was gone within 4 months. Credit card debt, back rent, a deposit on a new apartment, and, I kid you not, a trip to Miami for that design expo she'd been talking about for months. $62,000 gone. And then she was right back where she started, calling my parents for help. My parents gave it to her, of course. They dipped into their retirement savings to cover Chloe's rent for another 6 months. My dad told my Aunt Michelle about it, probably looking for sympathy, and Michelle told me. I didn't feel smug about it. I just felt tired. Tired of watching the same cycle repeat itself with my family while I stood on the outside, finally understanding that the cycle had nothing to do with me. It's been about 8 months since all of this went down. Here's where things stand. My parents and I have a relationship, but it's not what it used to be. We talk on the phone maybe once a month. Short calls, surface-level stuff. My mom hasn't apologized for any of it. Not the lobster comment. Not the inheritance grab. Not the 3 months of silence. I don't think she ever will. And I've made peace with that. I don't need her apology to know I did the right thing. Chloe and I don't really talk. She sent me a birthday text with a cake emoji. I said, thanks. That's about the extent of it. I don't hate my sister. I feel sorry for her, honestly. She was set up to fail. My parents created a person who can't take care of herself and then acted surprised when she couldn't take care of herself. Chloe is a product of their system, just like I was. The difference is, she got the comfortable role, and I got the useful one. Sarah and I are doing great. Better than great. The new house is everything we wanted. My job is going well. I'm up for another promotion next year. We're talking about starting a family, which is terrifying and exciting in equal measure. Sarah says she wants to name our first kid after my grandmother. I told her that was the best idea she's ever had, and she said, second best. The first was handing your mom that check. She's not wrong. Noah and Olivia are still in our lives, and Aunt Michelle has become someone I talk to regularly. She comes down for visits, brings homemade pie, and tells me stories about my grandmother that my mom never bothered to share. I'm building a family around me. Not the one I was born into, but the one I chose. And it turns out, the one you choose can be just as real, just as strong, and a whole lot healthier. I think about that night at the Red Lobster sometimes. What would have happened if Sarah hadn't overheard my mom? Would I still be picking up every check? Probably. And that thought keeps me up sometimes. Not anger, not resentment, just the chilling realization of how close I came to spending my whole life being used by people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But Sarah heard it. She did something about it. And then, finally, I did something about it. And now here I am, in a house I bought with my own money and a little help from a grandmother who knew I deserved better, married to a woman who saw what I couldn't see and loved me enough to show me. My mom was right about one thing, though. I never did say anything. Not for 34 years. But when I finally did, it changed everything. So if you're out there right now listening to this, and you're the Ethan in your family, the one who pays and forgives and swallows and smiles, let me tell you something. You're allowed to put the check down. You're allowed to say no. And the people who leave when you do, they were never really there for you to begin with. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'm going to go eat some pancakes with my wife. What about you? What would you have done in my situation? And do you think my reaction was justified? Or did I go too far? Let me know in the comments below.